Hi and welcome to the I Hate Drums YouTube channel. Today we're going to be looking at how to record the drums with two microphones. So previously we've recorded the drums with one mono overhead mic, and if you remember that video we actually used two different microphones at three different heights and we got a bunch of different sounds using those. Today we're going to be using two microphones, and that's going to involve one overhead mic up here and then one bass drum mic which is inside the bass drum. So let's get to the kit and see how those sound. So in order to finish my podcast series for Intermediate 1, I need to add some exercises to that podcast. So I've got a whole bunch of exercises I need to record to add to the audio. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to actually show you how you can record with two microphones instead of just the one. Previously we've looked at recording with just one mic, a mono mic, so you can revisit that video if you like, and we discussed having this overhead mic at different positions, and that would affect the sound. So when the mic's kind of here, the diaphragm is only really kind of picking up sort of that cone, if you like, kind of, if you imagine a cone coming down, it's going to get a lot of the drums, but not so much the cymbals, because the cymbals are kind of outside of that cone, if you like. But the higher you go with that microphone, that overhead, that mono overhead, the wider that cone is going to kind of cover the drums. So I need to record kind of 1 beat exercises, some slightly longer exercises. They don't need to be like the most hi-fi thing you've ever heard, so I don't need 13 microphones on the kit for this. But I do want it to sound like a good representation of the kit. So to do that, I'm using the two microphones. I've got a Beyer M201 for my mono overhead. This is a dynamic microphone, so it doesn't require any phantom power. And it's very good for a snare drum mic, but I've actually found, in this room at least, as a mono overhead, it's actually quite nice. It's not too bright, it's not too dark, it's just kind of in the middle range. And I've got it fairly high up because I do want to capture a lot of the cymbal sound here. And then to kind of beef up the bottom end of the bass drum, I've got another microphone in the bass drum, and this is an Audix D6. It's not suitable for everything, but if you're wanting a bass drum sound that's already kind of, pretty much there just by sticking the microphone in, this mic's really good for that. It's got its own sound. It's kind of been, engineered to have a very particular sound, but it's a very good kind of not too bottom end rumbly, but it's got quite a nice amount of punch to it as well. If you want more click on the bass drum, you really need to have that bass drum mic further into the drum. The closer you get to the actual sound source, where it's striking, when the beat is striking the head, the more click you're going to get. Now, I don't really want too much of that click sound. I'm not really a fan of the clicky bass drums, and I'm also going to be getting a bit of that attack on the bass drum from my overhead. So I've actually got the bass drum mic just inside the head. I've got a small porthole on the front of the bass drum head, and it's kind of just inside. Now, you don't really want it just on the outside of the head, because you can actually get a lot of air traveling out from that hole. So if your kind of microphone capsule's right on the outside, you're actually just blowing a lot of air into it. But by being a bit further into the drum, you're going to get more of the kind of, the body of the bass drum, if you like, and a bit of click as well. So let's see what these sound like. I'll just play some grooves. Let's see what happens. So I've got a metronome on at 60. the overhead sound on its own is pretty good anyway, but just by adding in that bass drum, you get a lot more bottom end coming in, and it just kind of fills out the bass drum a lot more. And it also means that because you're kind of beefing up the bottom end of the bass drum with that microphone, it means that the overhead mic can afford to be a little bit brighter. If you're only using that mono overhead that we talked about in the past, then any processing that you do to that microphone has to kind of, take into account the overall kit sound. And to be fair, you should still be aiming for that overall kit sound mic with that overhead. But if you want to push your cymbals to be a little bit brighter, then you're not going to lose any bottom end from the bass drum. And if you remember in that last video, when we talked about moving that overhead closer to get more bottom end, to actually balance the sound like that, when you've got a bass drum mic and the overhead, you don't really need to have the overhead microphone so close, because getting the bottom end for the bass drum from the overhead sound isn't as critical, because you can beef it up with the microphone that's in the bass drum. So whereas we had that restriction with the mono overhead, just the one mic, in terms of where it was positioned in order to balance the high and the bottom end frequencies, now that we've got that extra microphone in the bass drum, we can afford to have the overhead mic a little bit higher to get more of the kit and be a bit brighter, but we don't lose the bottom end because we're going to kind of compensate for that with that bass drum microphone on the inside of the bass drum. Now, there's loads of different microphones you can use in the bass drum. If all you've got are two of those 29-pound MB75s from Thomann, it's still going to sound good. Because you're still getting, a close source recording of the bass drum, an isolated sound, if you like, with the microphone in the bass drum, and then you've got a separate overhead mic as well. So even with, 60 pounds, you're still going to get a decent recording there. Now, this overhead mic, the M201, it's a really good snare drum mic, as I said. I've actually used it in the bass drum as well, when I was doing some sort of like 60s kind of recording. I didn't want too much bottom end, but I did want, a bit more punch on the bass drum, a bit more clarity on the bass drum. So actually having that inside the bass drum works really well as well. If you have the same mics, you're going to get the same results, obviously. If it's the same mic overhead, same mic in the bass drum. But if you've got different microphones at your disposal, try them in other places. Maybe don't put a ribbon mic, well inside your bass drum because you might make it explode. If you're just starting out, just some cheap mics, just try them in different positions and move them inside the bass drum as well. If you want a clickier sound, you need to have that microphone much closer in towards the bat head inside the drum. And if you find that, the drums don't sound quite right in the overhead mic, you can see here, I've got a lot of moon gel on these toms, and that's just actually dampening the overtones of the toms, and that's going to have a huge effect on the overall sound in the overhead mic. Make sure that your kit sounds good to begin with, because any microphone you put on that is like putting a microscope on it. It's gonna pick up all those kind of nasty things as well as the good things in equal measure. Okay, I hope you found that useful. If you've only got two microphones, you can do a lot with that. Having the bass drum microphone just gives you more options for getting some clarity and bottom end on the bass drum, but also you don't need to sacrifice so much top end on the overhead mic because you can boost that bottom end with the bass drum mic. So give that a try. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I will be doing some more recording videos in the future involving 3 mics, 4 mics, so keep an eye out for those and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss them. Until next time, enjoy.